Welcome back to Sidewalk Skyline podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers. And on today's episode, we're actually going to get off the sidewalk and more into the skyline. I'm talking to a pilot and director of a flight school in Three Hills, Alberta. We have an important and timely story happening here in Canada that's flying a bit under the radar, but could affect every traveler in the country. And that is the lack of pilots globally. There are fewer pilots. And so my guest, Dallas Derksen, is part of being a change agent and hopefully reversing that shortage. Welcome, Dallas. Great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
We're recording this in July, even though this one will probably be airing in December. So can you, in your best commercial pilot voice, tell me about the flight conditions for you today in Three Hills, Alberta?
Oh, my goodness. All right. Conditions here in Three Hills, the temperature is about 15 degrees currently, blue skies with just a few clouds floating by. And we're just glad that the rain that we've received recently has moved off, and it should be a really pleasant afternoon here in Three Hills.
Awesome, man. I'd fly in your plane. Although you did sound cheery, and I haven't heard too many commercial pilots sound that cheery.
Well, that's too bad. I wish more of them did, but I get it. After a long flight, it can be hard to sound cheery.
Yeah. So tell me about your career as a pilot. For you, it's more of a calling and a vocation. How is God at work in your life to guide you on this journey to the skies?
Oh, I've shared this story with many of my front seat passengers as I've flown with MAF around the world, and usually it takes about an hour and a half to two. So I'll give you the really short version. Growing up, I never really felt inclined to be a pilot. I wasn't one of these guys that's dreamed of being a pilot his whole life. If anything, I would say, when I was young, I would have had this idea that maybe one day when I have a surplus amount of cash, I'll get my private pilot license in a small airplane and tootle around Western Canada for fun. But I never dreamed of doing it as a profession for sure. In 1999, my wife, she was my fiance at the time, her and I were attending our local church, and there was a MAF couple who were actually really close friends of my parents. I'd known them my entire life. They were home on furlough, and they shared just simply the story about their last few years overseas and what they had been doing, what God had been doing through their ministry with MAF. And the Lord really spoke very strongly to my heart through their presentation. And by the time their presentation was concluded, I was absolutely convinced that this was something that God was calling me to do, asking me to give my life to this as well. And so I chatted with my fiance, my new fiance, that evening. And one of the first confirmations that we got was, as I shared with her what God had been doing in my heart and speaking to me, she said, "Dallas, you're not the only one. God was speaking to my heart as well." And she said, basically, God was telling me, this is what I'm calling Dallas to do, and I want you to go with him and to support him in this. So right off of day one, we had that first confirmation. We then reached out to the couple who had presented and arranged a meeting with them, because I knew nothing about what it took to become a pilot or to get into mission aviation. And then we arranged a supper meeting with them. And after that supper meeting, Karen and I had basically a 10-year plan to get from where we were into service with Mission Aviation Fellowship. And it ended up taking us 11 years. But even so, I think that was actually surprisingly accurate based on the variables involved. So,
did you have any children during that time?
We did. We got married and we had 3 kids
Hmm.
um, in fairly quick succession. Just after just before our third child was born, we came here to Three Hills, and I actually did my flight training here at Prairie Aviation at that time. Uh, our youngest was born then, and you know, doing flight training while raising 3 young children, and all the things going on there with that. Not having a full-time job during that time and things, a lot of challenges along the road there. But we really saw God's faithfulness to us through that time. Probably one of the tougher times of our lives, from a financial perspective, as our family was growing. Flight training is not cheap, and that continues to this day. And so we can really empathize with our students as well now as they go through that. Um, but yeah, I got my came to Prairie here and got my commercial pilot license in 2003 and 2004. Sorry, 2004 and 2005. And then was looking for a job. Historically, between the time that a pilot gets his or finishes his flight training, uh, mission aviation agencies require a period of experience that's needed. So you can't just have a brand new, inexperienced pilot head overseas into the challenging environment there. And so I went back up. I was initially from the Grand Prairie area in northern Alberta. I moved back up there and did some flight training for uh, just under a year. And with your kind of local flight school flight training, that typically is really jam packed on the weekends because everybody fly or works during the week and wants to fly on the weekends. And so over that time I worked there, I was only able to get to church 2 Sundays, and this really began to bother me. Trying to teach my young children that their relationship with the Lord is the most important thing, and yet every Sunday I had to go out the door to work while Karen took the kids to church. And they would ask, "Is Daddy coming to church today?" And she'd say, "No, he has to work." And that just really began to eat at me. I didn't like that. And so I gave notice and ended that job without knowing what I was going to do. And for the next 3 years, I actually spent my time in the construction agency. I got a job designing engineered wooden roof trusses for a truss company, and and so that was another time of kind of not questioning God, but not knowing when we were going to get back into aviation. And those years, the strength of the calling we had received really sustained us and kept us going because we really believed that God had a plan. And even though it was tough, we worked through it. We finally did join MAF in 2010, and then we spent 1 4-year term serving with MAF in the country of Uganda. And we flew throughout Uganda up into South Sudan. Most of our flying at that time was up into South Sudan, which was a brand new country at that time, and then west into the Democratic Republic of Congo. So those 3 countries were where I did a lot of my mission flying with MAF.
So you had your family living with you in Uganda as well?
That's right. We were
Yeah.
based in the capital city there in Kampala.
Hmm.
Um, I don't even know what the current numbers they say are. I would guess they would say the city is 2 to 3 million.
Hmm.
In accuracy, I would probably say it's closer to 5 million when you just consider all of the people that aren't counted,
Yeah.
who still live in
Yeah.
the city there.
Yeah. And for
So
those who don't know, the acronym MAF is Mission Aviation Fellowship. Tell me a bit about them as an organization, a bit of their history and the kind of work that they do.
sure. So I guess I can start with our mission and vision. Our mission is to serve together to bring help, hope, and healing through aviation. And our vision being to see isolated people transformed by the love of Christ. And so we use the tool that we've been given, the airplane, and our skills as pilots to kind of bridge that gap between the urban centers and the really remote people. Um, the history of MAF goes back to the days following World War II. There were a lot of aviators that were trained then as fighter pilots. bombers, all kinds of pilots. And as the war ended, um, it's interesting because it kind of started simultaneously both here in North America and in Europe. Pilots in both locations coming out of the war really felt that, hey, we can use these skills, we can use our airplanes to help advance the gospel throughout the world, to connect with these remote people. And so MAF was started then. Um, it's had a few names over the years, and I can't remember what it started out. I think it was just called Mission Aviation then, or Mission Fellowship. I'm not sure, but for most of its life, it's been known as Mission Aviation Fellowship. Betty Green was the first pilot with MAF here on this side of the ocean, and she flew. She had been one of the lady pilots that transported aircraft from being built here in North America over to the war. There were a lot of lady pilots in those days that did that during the war. And then after the war, she was the first pilot, and she flew down missions down into Mexico and other places for MAF. One of the most well-known MAF people is Nate Saint, and a lot of people are familiar with the story of Nate Saint and the 5 missionaries who were martyred in the jungles of Ecuador. Mm-hmm. So he was the pilot who was involved there, and they were reaching out to a remote tribe there. They finally were able to land on the beach and make contact with this tribe of natives, and after some what they perceived to be really good progress, they were attacked and massacred, and that made global headlines at the time of these missionaries who were martyred down in the jungles of Ecuador. But that story has really been used over the years to make people aware of mission aviation and to draw a lot of pilots into a career as a mission aviator. Currently, MAF serves in over 35 countries around the world, mostly developing nations, but not entirely. And like I said earlier, just providing a link between the urban centers and the ultra remote. So we fly missionaries to their postings. For example, in Papua New Guinea, there's a very robust MAF program there, and they routinely will do anywhere from a short 15 or 20-minute flight to anything. I don't know that they do anything over an hour there. Papua New Guinea isn't a super large landmass, but those short flights that they do, bringing the missionaries to their villages, can save days or potentially even weeks of travel by ground. And so, rather than arriving in their village just exhausted, possibly even sick, they're able to land there on those airstrips that have been built over the decades, and the missionary is able to get right to work. They provide other support as well. We bring in food and supplies as needed, and then there's a lot of medical flights that happen as well when people are injured, snake bites, animal injuries, however it is, they just get sick and need medical help that they can't get in those villages. They can call MAF, and we come in and land with our planes on these little postage stamp runways, and then pick them up and take them back to a larger urban center where there's actually more advanced medical care available.
Yeah. Does MAF do any work in the remote areas of Canada?
We have in the past. There's been a couple times we've tried to do so, because it is interesting, because as you go further north, there is more and more remote villages here in Canada. We currently aren't flying as MAF here in Canada beyond PATC, but the vision is there, and it's strong, because when you look at the expense of training a pilot, and then the expense of moving them and their families overseas, training them to operate in that environment and everything, it just seems so logical that there's a place somehow for MAF to operate here in Canada. We don't need visas to travel within Canada. We don't need to get different licenses for a different country or to transport aircraft there. Everything is right here to do it. One of the big differences of here in Canada, though, is there are different commercial operators and a couple very small missions who also fly airplanes already. So
Yeah.
there is some of that, but I mean, we all know how big Canada is. There's room for so much more.
Yeah.
And I know MAF Canada is currently investigating the potential and the possibilities that exist here in our own country
Hmm.
to serve those people.
Yeah. Part of MAF's work is disaster response. Have you witnessed some and flown into some disaster areas? And I'm thinking about the perspective of viewing disaster from 10,000 feet and then being on the ground and then going back up again, and just wondering about just some of the spiritual dynamics that go on inside you if you've had those kinds of experiences.
MAF does do disaster response and have done so for as long as we've been an entity. Providing practical care and support after a disaster. Um, it really gets your foot in the door. A lot of the agencies that respond after a disaster are faith-based as well, and so it's not unusual after a disaster for those missions to just get their foot in the door in those countries, in those places. And not only that, but you build a ton of respect with those people and credibility because they see that, hey, these people actually care about us. It's really real. They're not just pretending. They're not just doing it to make themselves feel better. Um, for myself, I've only been involved in one disaster response. That was in 2015 after the earthquake that struck Nepal.
Mm.
And I was able to go over at that time. We partnered with a helicopter company that existed because MAF didn't have any program in Nepal. And so we found a commercial helicopter operator that had a good safety record and a high level of training and ability there. And we partnered with them, and and we flew people all over the mountains there. It was I guess one of the things that I really remember, and this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I was able to go out on two helicopter um, flights to villages that had been impacted by the earthquake. Most of what I was doing was in Kathmandu, in the capital city there, at the airport, connecting incoming passengers with the helicopters, bringing their supplies through security, and then taking them to the helicopter where they would be loaded and then flown out to wherever they were going. But I do remember the first time, it was a relatively short flight into the mountains and was dropped off at a village, and I watched the helicopter fly away. And I kind of got a very different perspective of the value of what MAF does because he flew away, and I knew like that I don't know what it was, 20-minute flight to get there would take us weeks of travel up and down some of the most jagged mountain areas in the world. And I just was very aware that if he doesn't come back to pick me up, I'm basically stuck out here until he does. And it just really provided for me a different glimpse into
Mm.
what people may experience when I drop them off.
Mhm.
Um, from the disaster response perspective, though, it was really um, it's something I'll never forget. Those villages and a portion of the city had just been flattened in the earthquake. Like just you could see where buildings had been because there were little piles of bricks left, and that was it. And in some of those places, people had already erected temporary shelters and things, and so it didn't even look like it must have immediately the day or two following the earthquake. But we were able to bring food. A lot of their food had been lost underneath this rubble, and like I said, a lot of the responding agencies were Christian missions that stepped up and said, "Hey, these people have a physical need, and so we can address that, and possibly while we're there addressing that, we can meet the greater spiritual need and share the gospel with these people as well."
I think a lot of armchair critics who sit at home and watch their news cycle about what's going on in the world and just form opinions about Christianity and religion, and they don't understand the quiet work of the gospel that goes on all the time in the toughest places in the world. And it doesn't get the press, and maybe that's a good thing, because the where it matters most is on the ground in a disaster, and the people that are impacted, they get it. The armchair critics who just have big opinions about everything else, that they may never know just what God's people are doing all over the world. Um, that's interesting. And I mean, you obviously have logged a lot of air miles. What if you had any terrifying and or miraculous events happen in the cockpit?
Thankfully, I've never had an engine failure. I've never had to do an emergency landing anywhere. But there have been a few things that have happened that when I got home and just lay down at the couch on our couch, and my wife. There's something about those days where my wife is able to see it, and it's like, okay, it was one of those days. He needs some time.
Hmm.
And one of those days happened when I was in Uganda. And like I mentioned, South Sudan was a very new country, and it wasn't very long until, even as a new country, they plunged into civil war. And so I was flying up in South Sudan that day, and a very typical day as far as that, the life of a missionary pilot. I got up in the morning, went to the airport, pre-flighted my aircraft. The passengers that I had came and were checked in. Their bags were loaded on the airplane, and then we went up north. When we're bringing people into South Sudan, we had to go through the capital city of Juba for immigration. So we would do that, and then headed west to the small remote villages out there to drop them off where they needed to go. And on my last stop of the day, was in a small village out in fairly far west South Sudan. And I landed there and disembarked the remainder of my passengers who needed to go there. And I was also picking up quite a few people at that time as well to take back to Kampala, to Uganda. And my phone rang, and it was our program director in Uganda calling. And that was very unusual because he almost never would contact the pilots while they were out there. That would be the ops manager or something like that if contact needed to be made. So I answered the phone, and he just kind of quietly asked, "So how are things?" I'm like, "This is weird. Things are fine. Thanks for asking. Is anything different?" No, no, nothing's really different. It's very, very normal, fairly quiet, not very many people around other than our passengers. Is there any increased military presence? No. Why are you asking me this? Well, South Sudan has just declared civil war, and they're shutting down their airspace to all air traffic. Um, how do you think that you can get out of the country? And so, your blood pressure goes up and your heart rate increases, and probably started sweating even more than I would have. It's 40-degree heat already. Um, and so, but obviously nobody there had been made aware of this yet. And so I loaded my passengers as efficiently as I could, and they got the most basic, simplified briefing, pre-flight briefing that you've ever heard in your life. And then I started up my airplane. And of course, there's no active radar out there. And so I left my radios off, I left my transponder off, everything off, and
Was
just
was that so that you wouldn't be traced?
yep. I was pretty
Yeah.
sure that they couldn't see me anyhow, but I didn't want to give any excuse or any reason for anybody to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was about 10 minutes straight south to the Congolese border, and we had overflight permissions because of the flying we do in Congo. And so I took off and just headed straight south. And on that GPS, I think it was a bright yellow line that indicated the international boundary. And I tell you, the relief that I felt when I crossed that line was just immense. When that on that particular day, my wife was also the one doing flight following. So there's our flights are always being followed by somebody, so they know how many people are on board, our fuel load, how long we can fly, where we're going, when we're airborne, when we're landed, all safety protocols. And she was our flight follower that morning, and so she was aware of what was going on. But like I said, I left my radios off. I hadn't made any calls. I crossed that boundary and I turned everything on and I made a call to them. And even over the radio, I could hear the relief, not only in her voice, but the others around. She told me later that there was, it was a tiny little desk and barely bigger than a closet-sized room, and there was like herself and like four of the people from management that were just all crowded in there listening to see what would happen. And so got home that day, and that was one of those days where it was just like, whew, glad to be home at the end of the day.
Wow. You know, you guys in MAF and the Prairie Aviation School that you're doing, I mean, you're wired for adventure because you're going into difficult places, places that are not well served with infrastructure, and so you
Mhm.
guys are kind of laying it on the line, I think, perhaps more than others, and then when something does go wrong, it's big news if an aircraft goes down anywhere, and yet it's still one of the safest ways to travel, by far
Mhm.
safer than driving your car. I'd think that a lot of pilots would have a high level of detail orientation and conscientiousness related to their work.
Mhm.
But along with that, and I'm thinking of commercial pilots, are there organizations that provide spiritual and religious care, chaplaincy in the aviation communities? Because I'm just thinking, they're in some cases they're kind of the truckers of the air, and
Absolutely.
we have chaplaincy to truckers. What is there for the aviation community?
So I guess I can think of kind of a two-part answer. Firstly, within MAF, they do a tremendous job of providing um, pastoral care for us. Uh, and I've been so impressed with that throughout my, I guess it's 15 years now with MAF. Wow. Um, and 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 I can't begin to overstate the value of that and how much we've appreciated that as an industry. One of the ones that I more recently became aware of, and that was actually 1 year ago this week. There's the big EAA Air Venture event in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, this week every year. And the International Association of Mission Aviation always has a tent there. And last year we were there representing PATC, Prairie Aviation Training Centre, as in that tent. And one of the other agencies that was in that tent was FCAP, and that's the Fellowship of Christian Airline Personnel. And this is exactly what they do. It was the first time I'd heard about them, and we were so impressed. They were right across the aisle from us. So all week we were talking with them, getting to know their people. They were getting to know us. And in the time since then, they've sent out a representative here to PATC and shared with our students. And just got an email the other day. They're planning on coming back again this fall. But what they do is you hit the nail right on the head. It's a challenge. You don't know. Not only is it difficult to make it to church on Sunday morning, but you don't know for airline pilots if you're going to be in some country in Europe, South America, where you're going to be. And so the Fellowship of Christian Airline Personnel, they've established chapters all over the globe. And it just provides connectivity for these pilots wherever they go. They publish devotional guides. They connect people with others where they are so that they can connect together and kind of have their own little fellowship as they're able. Because the airlines, as a bit of a generalization here, but the airline industry is a very spiritually dark place. You're all over the world. The temptation is strong.
You're by yourself.
You're by yourself in your hotel room at night. And I don't think this is any big secret, but like historically, the interactions between flight crew and the flight attendants, and they're all at the same hotel as well. So whether you're very, very diligent about it and have established boundaries and live by those or not, temptation is still temptation. And the Fellowship of Christian Airline Personnel, I think, are just doing a tremendous job in helping, believing pilots to live with integrity and above board, and to provide the help that they need.
Yeah. And
we all know that the temptation is not a sin.
Yeah.
But you need to have a mechanism in place so when that temptation happens, you can deal with it and respond to it appropriately.
And if you fly with a clear conscience, you're probably going to fly better.
I would think so. Yeah.
Well, you've got the logo on your shirt, Prairie Aviation Training Centre.
Yeah.
And there's, I mentioned in the opening comments that there's a global pilot shortage emerging. Can you elaborate on that shortage? Why is there a shortage of pilots?
Sure. I can't give any definitive answers as to why, but there's two things kind of at the top of my list. One is simply that the population of the globe is growing, so there's more people than there used to be, and global travel, I think, happens more than it ever has in the past. Growing up as a teenager, I can't think of very many people at all who would have traveled to Europe. Whereas these days, a lot of people, if not traveled overseas to Europe, have traveled, at least they've flown down into the States or to resorts in Mexico. So the demand for global travel, I think, is growing and is higher than it's ever been. And the ability of flight schools to train pilots just haven't been able to keep up with that. The other thing that I think is a part of that is the second part to the answer is, as an industry, aviation has only been around for 100 years. Not even as an industry, period. I think the first flight, the Wright brothers, 100 years of that was celebrated just a few years back. As a pilot, maybe I should know that. But, airplanes have only been around for 100 years. Airlines, more or less since World War II. And so it's only in the last, 20, 30 years that pilots have started to retire. Our industry is still quite young. And so kind of until that point, every pilot that was trained just made that pilot group get larger. But now you have pilots that are leaving the global pilot pool at the same time the demand is increasing. And so I think those two things are two of the big factors that have combined to kind of make a global pilot shortage. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, it seems very obvious, but it wasn't anything that the industry was really prepared to to deal with, and now we're dealing with trying to play catch up.
So Aviation is part of Prairie College. Tell me about Prairie College and about PATC and you're the director there. And so what tell me all about this part of your journey.
Sure. So Prairie College has been around for 103 years. We celebrated our centenary just a few years ago, and um, it's been known for most of its existence as Prairie Bible Institute or Prairie Bible College. A lot more people would be familiar with that name. Throughout that time, there's wherever you go on Earth, basically, you can find a graduate from Prairie Bible Institute or Prairie College. Missionaries who have worked all over the world and are to this day. So that's been a huge part of Prairie's past, preparing pastors, missionaries, church workers, and just even lay workers who love the Lord to serve Him wherever God plants them. In more recent times, that's included aviation, nursing, paramedics, and we're this close to getting a Bachelor of Education and being able to train teachers as well. And the point there is not just to train pilots, medical professionals and teachers, but to train these people um, so that they have a solid uh, faith background. They know the Lord, and they're able to live that out in their workplace. For mission pilots, being a pilot is a huge part of what we do, but we also take advantage of opportunities that come up to share the gospel with people wherever we are around the world as well. So that's a huge part of that. In I think it was 2017, not that long ago, MAF Canada and Prairie College started talking. MAF Canada has a long relationship with Prairie here at the flight program. There's often been MAF missionaries that have been here, but it was formalized at that time. And MAF has had management of the flight program since that time. So the majority of us who are here at Prairie Aviation Training Centre are active pilots with MAF. Our entire maintenance department is made up of MAF personnel. And so it's really, I think it's super exciting for these young people, not all young people, but mostly young people who are feeling a call into mission aviation to be able to come here for the training that we provide. And although a lot of the training is similar to what you get in other places, there are some unique things that we do. You know, being a pilot is more than just flying an airplane. Situational awareness, decision making, leadership and teamwork, communications, all these things kind of combine to make a well-rounded pilot. And so we really try to focus on teaching those skills, more of a soft skill, to our students, so that when they do leave here and go with a mission aviation agency, they're able to operate safely in some of the most challenging environments in the world. And in addition to that, we're able to disciple them, to provide biblical training and instruction so that their walk with the Lord is also strengthened while they're here. And like I said before, so they can be, effective ministers of the gospel wherever God plants them, whether that's in the airlines here in North America or if that's flying into a small rural airstrip somewhere in the world.
Uh, is MAF a known commodity in the aviation industry? What kind of reputation does MAF have around the world? Is it? Do you meet many people that never heard of it in the industry?
Yes and yes. The My experience has been the reputation of MAF globally is incredibly positive amongst people who are aware of MAF and what we do.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've also had a lot of experience where I start talking with someone about what I do, and I've never heard of this. I never even knew this was a thing. And it's like, yeah, I've heard stories of quite a few MAF pilots who felt called to global mission work and yet did not feel like they were able to be a pastor or a teacher or something like that. Um, and then when they hear about MAF and what we do, you mean I can use my skills of a pilot to serve overseas as a missionary? Yeah, absolutely, you can do that. And so that's always really, I love that. I think that we're called to be missionaries wherever we are. And for some people, that is overseas. And we also recognize that, for a lot of our students, our graduates, some of that is in the airlines or with Canadian commercial operators as well. And we have a lot of our graduates who've gone out and done that. And it's always really encouraging to hear back from them stories of how they were able to represent Christ and to potentially even share the gospel with people um, where there is no mission aviation program, and they're just living it out in their commercial setting.
Yeah, yeah, and you guys are actually, I think, ahead of the curve in terms of being able to train pilots. You guys have a bunch of new flight simulators, and what advantage does a simulator give you, and how? And also a question about simulation. How easily does the virtual experience translate into real world application?
Those are great questions. Simulator training is not new in aviation. It's been around almost as long as aviation has been around in some form. And we've been doing training on simulators here at PATC for a long time as well. Kind of one of the challenges historically. So in the airline world, the simulators are incredibly advanced. Basically, those simulators are so advanced that if you fly an hour in that simulator, so a 727 pilot for WestJet would fly in that simulator, and an hour of flight in that simulator is accredited in his logbook and his experience as though an hour in the real airplane, because it's so accurate and the flight model is so precise. Um, and so that's how the commercial aviation world does a lot of the training. A lot of the training for these pilots as they get into a new aircraft type is done on these simulators. And then they're able to get into the actual airplane and go fly it competently. The first time they step into the real airplane, they know what to do. For flight schools, a lot of the simulator training has been instrument procedures and instrument flying based, just simply because the cost of those simulators that airlines use is wildly more than a flight school could ever afford. Uh, I'm pulling a number out of thin air, but I would imagine somewhere between 15 and 25 million for one of those sims, possibly even more. I don't know. Literally have no idea, but I know it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so, for a small flight school like us, that's wildly outside of our price range. But the smaller flight simulator, it doesn't look too different than the setup that a lot of amateurs will build in their basement or something, and they'll go flying online in the online world with Microsoft Flight Sim and games like that. The difference is our flight simulators have been certified to be able to do instrument flying and instrument work. What we haven't been able to do is the visual training. That's a huge part of basic flight training. Just basically to be able to replicate what we do with our airplanes every day. That level of simulation just hasn't been good. So we have these new simulators that are our first one. A few of our instructors had a chance to sit in it just last week. So, I mean, keeping in mind that last week is in July, um, it's really exciting the possibilities that these simulators offer. So they're what is being called a mixed reality sim. So the flight deck on the simulator is an exact replica of, in our case, the Cessna 172, which is our training platform that we use to train our students. And so the switches are in the same place, the yoke is the same in the same place. The throttle mixture control gauges, everything exactly replicates a Cessna 172.
Is that a single prop?
That's a small single engine aircraft,
Yeah.
a small four-seater.
Yeah.
I think it's the most widely used training aircraft in the world. There's a couple others that are close, but a lot of people have learned to fly on a 172. The difference is the student gets in the simulator and puts on their virtual reality headset. So a lot of people are familiar with the Meta Quest virtual reality devices that are out there. A lot of people have them in their house. It's very much like that, but the headset is a much higher quality to drive the graphics and visuals. And so when the student looks at the instruments in front of them on these sims, they see what's actually there. There's cameras, pass-through cameras that are built in. And so they see the instruments moving. They see their actual hands, not a digital representation of their hands. And so you're actually able to build real muscle memory and to respond to what's really real in front of you. But when you look outside of the cockpit, everything is virtual. And so these they're called immersive simulators. Immersive is the brand name. They do a really good job of providing a highly detailed virtual environment. Part of what they provide for us in getting these simulators is a really, really HD modeling of our airport here in Three Hills. So when students get in there, teaching takeoffs, landings, things like that in our other sims, we've never been able to do that well. It doesn't model that well. In these sims, it seems like are going to be able to do that for us. And so it's really exciting. It kind of opens up the door to possibilities of training that we weren't able to do previously. We're actually part of a Transport Canada pilot project that is investigating exactly this. They see the potential of this new emerging technology to be able to drive down the number of hours of training required in the actual airplane and replace those hours with these simulator hours. And so this pilot project will have 4 students starting it next month. We're trying to help them answer that question because, of course, you have to have training in the airplane. Nothing will ever make that go away. At least we're not there yet. But it seems like with these new emerging virtual type sims, it's finally reached a level where some of that can happen. And so we'll be taking extensive notes and reporting to them of all the training that these students do, both in the simulator and in the real aircraft. And the goal there is just to see, okay, how much of that real world flight training can transition into the simulator. And then at that point, it'll be on Transport Canada, who are our regulators, to actually do something with that information and make the decision, how much of that can we allow flight schools to do? How high quality of a simulator can we allow that to happen on? All these kinds of details. For us, though, we really think that the possibility is there. So for the simulators, I mean, we're Canadians. We know what winters are like. It's cold. It's snowy. We can come out after a night and the runway's covered in snow, and it'll be a few hours of delay while the runway is cleared off, or it's just plain too cold. We're not going to be that cruel to our airplanes and risk damaging them by running them in the cold weather. And so over the winter, a lot of flights get canceled, and there's the potential now for us to be able to take those students over to the simulator center and plug them into our sims and to just continue with their flight training. Beyond that, and again, this is going to really depend on where Transport Canada lands on the use of these sims, but being able to teach night ratings during the day, because in the simulator, you can make it night. You control the sun there. Yeah. Or over the winter where it's so dark and there's so little daylight, being able to teach daylight flying techniques and things after it gets dark. On the MAF side of it, the where the company is developing a Cessna 208 simulator. It's commonly known as the Cessna Caravan. The Caravan is, I think, the most widely used mission aircraft globally right now. There's a number of others that have been used for a lot of years, but it seems like the Caravan is kind of taking more and more of that in mission aviation. But the the possibility exists with this technology that overseas in East Africa, in Papua New Guinea, in South America, wherever these remote airstrips are, that MAF could send up a drone over those ones and do high definition surveys of those airstrips, send that information in, and they could then plug those airstrips into their database in these simulators, which then opens up the possibility for us here at PATC in the middle of the prairies in Canada to provide really ultra realistic and ultra effective flight training for pilots who are heading over there. So that when they get there, they get there, they start their indoctrination there and their orientation and the training process there to onboard them. They get to these little remote airstrips, and as they fly over, they're like, "Hey, I know where this is. I've flown into this airstrip before." And of course, we'll have the same procedures that those places are flying with, the same safety criteria, the same approach patterns and things like that that can be taught to them. So the first time they get there in an airplane, it's like, hey, I'm familiar with this already, and hopefully to decrease the amount of time needed to train them in the actual aircraft there, which means that when they get there, that time between when they arrive and when they can actually fly as a pilot by themselves is much, much shorter without compromising safety.
I got one last question for you. When I finished high school in 1979, I had I would call an experimental year where I didn't know what I was going to do, and eventually after a year, I ended up going to Bible college, and that's a whole other story and led me into ministry. But so for a period of time after high school, I went to flight school here at YQG in Windsor, and started to take lessons. I was gonna work towards my private license, and went to flight school at St. Clair College, and I loved being in the cockpit with an instructor. Mechanically, I was taking to the aircraft. I got all that. But then sitting in the classroom, and we had two flight manuals that were like thicker than phone books, and you had to pretty much ingest and memorize all this data that's important, very important. You can't fly without knowing what you're doing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I bombed out on the course, and I thought, I know why I didn't. It's because I'm still got my high school habits. I don't study much. I try to wing it, and you can't wing it. So I said, okay, I'm going to knuckle down. I'm going to take this school again, and so I enrolled again, and all the while, getting a few hours flying, and well, I just bombed out the second time, and I said, that's it. And then I went and became a jail guard for a little while at 18 years old. Like,
Wow.
did I have any idea what I was doing? No. Thankfully, the Lord interrupted my sense of, I could do this, I could do that, and the path took shape. But my last question for you would be, if anybody's listening and something's stirring in them, they're thinking, you know what, I've been thinking about becoming a pilot, or um, go back to you and your then fiance, hearing the presentation. What would you say to somebody about the qualifications, the preparations involved in becoming a pilot. Um, you know, uh, I think what you guys are doing with your simulators, I can see how strategic that is to actually make it more accessible to more people, right?
Mhm.
So just talk on our way out here about what can a person expect if they go from being curious to saying, no, I'm going to do this.
As a first step, reach out to a local flight school or flight college. Almost all of them will have what they'll call an intro flight. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Usually it's, half an hour to 40 minutes. They'll take you up in a small training airplane and you'll get to experience the sensation of flight in a small aircraft. I would say most people who feel that they might want to be a pilot absolutely enjoy it. And they love it, and it's a confirmation for them. There are those who find that they don't like it at all, and so that might be something worth doing. And I always encourage people to do that. Usually, it sets the hook deeper, so be ready for that. Flight training is not cheap, and so um, be ready for that because flying is amazing. But I would say if you're looking at or thinking about maybe mission aviation or even service with MAF, uh, check out the website maf.ca, and you can connect with people there. You can read more about myself there. You can see what we do and where we're doing it, and the impact that MAF is having around the world. If you're thinking beyond that, and hey, maybe I want to get my training at PATC, um, that's all done through Prairie College. So prairie.edu is where you'd go there, and you can click on the aviation page there and find out about PATC and what that is. And then the admissions department there will help guide you through actually getting here and receiving your training here. Um, you kind of hit the nail on the head with what you said about about the need to really bear down and study hard. And I think more than any, you know, physics or math or sciences that you may get in high school, um, the common denominator that we see in our students here is that drive to to do well. And the hours needed, you said the flight manuals are thick. We may need to define what a phone book is for some viewers. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
I was thinking that. Yeah,
um, yeah, here's our weather textbook. It's that's
memorize
just
that.
weather.
Yep.
That's just a small part of it. And so there's a lot of reading, a lot of knowledge that you have to absorb, and so you have to be willing to do the time to buckle down and do that reading to find out what you need to do to drive that home. Read, highlight, make your own notes, study those notes because as much as you might think that winging it is the thing we do in aviation, it really isn't. Um, you got to bear down and put in the time and learn. And being a pilot is a continual learning process. You'll never stop learning. You have to recertify on a continual basis anytime you're into a new type, going into a new airport, flying a new procedure, all these things. You're just constantly absorbing information. And for some students, it's a real challenge to figure out how to do that. And it's always exciting for us to see when those students figure out what it is that really locks that into their brain and how they learn that information and make that happen. Um, so yeah, if you're willing to put in the work required, like I said, maf.ca or prairie.edu, those are the two places I would go to, and for sure reach out to a friend or a local flight school
Yeah.
and get in the air.
And I'll
It's
be sure. Yeah, and I'll be sure to put those links in the show notes at Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.com. And Dallas, thank you so much for taking some time this afternoon to give us an insight into your world and the incredible work that is going on mostly quietly around the world. And yet you guys are such an important part of global mission. Thank you for the work that you do. Blessings to you, and hope maybe one day we'll cross paths again.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share about my journey and what MAF is doing around the world.
Yeah, thank you, Dallas. And that was Dallas Derksen. Hey, on the next episode, I'm going to be having a conversation with Anthony Freeman from Bridges Christian College, a Assembly of God Bible college that he was instrumental in helping to found in New Orleans, Louisiana. He was here in Windsor earlier this fall with a team of young adults that are students. They were on a mission trip, and so I got to know him, and I said, I need to have this guy on the podcast. He's got a wide range of ministry experience in urban settings and a lot of great stories to tell. So please come back and hear our episode with Anthony Freeman. Until that time, I'm your host, Kevin Rogers, and you've been listening to Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.